Welcome to True Crime and Coke. I am your host, Eve, and this podcast is about true crime, disappearances, conspiracies, hauntings, and anything strange or unusual, all while drinking an excessive amount of Diet Coke. If you have a story to share, I would love to hear and feature it on a future episode. Just email me at truecrimeandcoke@gmail.com and put which category it is in the subject line. If you enjoy this podcast and want it to continue, please rate me 5 stars, tell your friends about me, and consider supporting me on Patreon under True Crime and Coke. Now that that's out of the way, let's begin. Hi, this is Eve. Welcome to my 5th episode. It is going to be a 3 to 4-parter, and it is going to be explicit. I mark all my shows explicit, however, this truly is the definition of explicit. It is about child murder and torture, and it will be in extreme detail. So if you don't want to hear about it, then don't listen to it. These killers are truly horrible, and I wish I could say they are the worst of the worst, but there are far many more just like this out there, so let's get started. Westley Allan Dodd, the Vancouver child killer. Westley Allan Dodd was born on July 3, 1961, in Washington. He was the oldest of 3 children. At the age of 28 years old, he was convicted of murdering 3 children and molested an estimated 170 children. But to start Wesley's story, we have to first begin at the end. It was November of 1989 when Wesley went to the movies with hopes to kidnap and eventually kill his 4th victim. But luckily his plans did not work out, and instead of a 4th victim, it was he who was captured. Westley Allan Dodd sat in the back row at the New Liberty Theater in Washington, which is near Vancouver. Honey, I Shrunk the Kids was what he was watching, but he wasn't there for the film. Instead, he systematically scanned the audience for his next victim. He then watched a young boy who walked up the aisle toward the lobby, and he was alone. Dodd casually got out of his seat and followed the child into the restroom. Another boy, 6 years old, also walked through the lobby to use the bathroom. Dodd, smiling, motioned to the 6-year-old to go first. The theater employees relaxed in the quiet of the lobby after the film started, but a child's frantic screams pierced the calm. The cries were coming from the men's bathroom. Dodd pushed the door open, carrying the shrieking boy over his shoulder. The little boy was hysterical, said one of the owners to the newspaper. He was screaming so loud you could hear him for 3 blocks. They watched as a small, youthful-looking man with dark hair and a thick mustache walked to the exit carrying the boy who twisted and desperately was trying to break free. "Calm down, son," he said, patting the boy on the back. "Calm down." It was not the first time that a child had thrown a temper tantrum in the theater. But this child's persistent cries of help me, distressed them. They ran after Dodd, who hurried down the dark street, tightening his grip on the little frightened boy. When he approached his car, he fumbled for his keys, and the 6-year-old, who was named James, was able to break free and scrambled away as fast as he could. He ran straight into one of the theater owners who was pursuing Dodd, grabbed onto her legs and held tight. "That man was going to hurt me," James told her. The two went back to the theater to find his mom. Meanwhile, William Ray Graves, the boyfriend of James's mother, heard a commotion after the boy left to use the restroom. In the lobby, he heard what almost happened and became furious. "There was fire in my eyes," he said. "It burned me up. That little guy is pretty close to me. I love him and I love his family." Someone had seen the abductor, a mustard yellow Pinto station wagon. So Graves ran outside into the dark streets looking for the car. He was determined to chase him down, even if by foot. Astonishingly, the Pinto station wagon was stopped on the street, apparently stalled. This guy was stuck, and Graves cautiously made his move. He approached the Pinto carefully and asked the driver if he needed help. Dodd nervously glanced at Graves, but he accepted his offer. When he had his chance, Graves grabbed Dodd by the neck and dragged him back to the theater. "You have just been detained. We're going to get the cops," he said, resisting the urge to hurt the man who tried to take James. In the theater lobby, Graves tied the young man's hands behind his back with a belt and sat him down until the police arrived. Dodd stared at the floor and said nothing. See, the thing is, James knew to make a commotion if anyone tried to abduct him. The police arrived shortly and made the arrest. It was a 6-year-old boy named James and a man named William Ray Graves who brought down Northwest's most notorious and vicious child killers, Westley Allan Dodd. And with his capture, we can now start at the beginning. Westley Allan Dodd was perhaps one of the most calculating predators to prowl. Small in stature and sometimes assuming a baby voice himself, he did not fit the profile of the dangerous, trench-coated stranger that children are taught to avoid. Like many child molesters, Dodd knew how to gain access to his victims. He befriended children with gifts and games and knew how to coax them into dangerous situations without using force. Dodd began sexually abusing children when he was only 13 years old. As grade school youngsters passed by his house, he stood in the upstairs window naked, hiding his face behind the curtain. Eventually, a child reported the flasher's address to the police, who notified Dodd's parents that someone was exposing himself to children from their house. The authorities showed little interest in who it was or prosecuting him. The Dodds thought it might have been a friend of Wesley's. After realizing that exposing himself from his own house would get him in trouble, Westley Allan Dodd took his show on the road, he called it, and pedaled his bike around the neighborhood looking for children aged 10 or younger. He would ride by, yell at them, and expose himself when he got their attention. He looked for boys, he said, because boys didn't report me as often as girls did. He began exposing himself because he had hit puberty and wasn't educated about sex. He never claimed to have been sexually abused himself and later blamed his unhappiness as a child on his parents' constant fighting and their lack of emotional support. Wesley's father, Jim Dodd, told the Oregonian that he acknowledged his son's sexual deviancy with father-son chats, but mostly avoided talking about it, despite Wesley's increasing arrests and warnings. Wesley was otherwise well-behaved. He never did drugs, he never drank, and he never smoked, said Wesley's father. But when his parents divorced, the exposing escalated to molesting. Wesley described himself as socially isolated, intimidated by girls, and when others began dating and going to high school dances, he stayed home, thinking of ways to instigate sexual activity with children. According to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which classifies and describes mental disorders, pedophilia is one of the behaviors associated with loners who have low self-esteem. They feel sexually inadequate, afraid to risk rejection by their peers. In avoiding mature relationships, they fail to mature themselves. But don't worry, many people have low self-esteem and are loners like me, and several of you listeners, I'm sure, but it doesn't mean that we're pedophiles, because that's disgusting. Like most child molesters, Dodd betrayed the trust of children who were close to him. Stranger abductions are usually a last resort. If a sexual predator has access to kids that know and trust him, he will take advantage of their trust. Dodd's first victims were his own cousins. At age 14, he molested his own 8-year-old cousin in a closet, her 6-year-old brother later that day, and another male cousin weeks later. He also later molested the kids of a woman that his father was dating. When his cousins were not available to him, Wesley placed himself in situations where he'd be around children. He befriended the neighborhood boys and offered to babysit. At age 16, Dodd was asked to fill in for a neighbor's usual babysitter. He then molested the children as they slept. Later, Wesley sought jobs where he'd encounter kids, including being a camp counselor. It wasn't until later that he used force with his victims. Usually, Dodd tricked children into inappropriate contact through fun and games. He dared kids to run around naked and suggested party games like spin the bottle, strip poker, skinny dipping, or truth or dare. He exploited the innocent curiosity of children and made the molestation seem like normal fun. "I've done this to other kids," he'd say, and they liked it. He manipulated their uncertainty and nervousness, and perhaps their guilt that they had done something wrong. Dodd attempted to naturalize the situation to little kids who didn't know better. He tried to convince a confused child that he was teaching him something fun that adults do, and that it was perfectly normal. The arrests didn't stop him. At the age of 15, Wesley had already been arrested for exposing himself, but he was not prosecuted. Instead, the authorities recommended counseling. The arrests accumulated, but Wesley was rarely punished with the appropriate jail time. When children he had been molesting on a regular basis moved away, Wesley, now 18 and desperate for new victims, pursued kids he didn't know. He realized that with children he didn't know, he could be more forceful. In one typical incident, he encountered a young boy fishing alone in a wooded area. He asked the boy if he wanted to see something really neat. Once they were isolated, Wesley ordered the boy to undress, but fortunately for the child, they were interrupted by another group of kids. If he couldn't find a child alone, he would approach a group of children and demand that one of them pull his pants down. Sometimes Dodd went out on bizarre nude excursions, rollicking at children's playground naked in the middle of the night. In September of 1981, Dodd enlisted into the Navy. But a few weeks before that, he had attempted to abduct a couple of little girls. Although they reported him to the police, he wasn't arrested. Wesley was stationed at a submarine base in Bangor, Washington, and preyed on the children who lived on the base. He also made excursions to Seattle, where he accosted kids in movie theater bathrooms. Dodd began to use money as a lure, coaxing children into secluded areas to help him supposedly get something, then ordering the child to pull down his pants. He discovered that the arcade was a good place to find kids who wished they had more money. He gave them quarters for each of his demands. At one point, he was arrested, offering to pay some boys $50 each to go to a motel and play strip poker with him. But after he admitted to the police that he planned on molesting the boys, the charges were mysteriously dropped. Did the authorities think that admitting to something as depraved as this was punishment enough? Did they not see his previous records? I don't understand. Eventually, Wesley was arrested and received a general discharge from the Navy. He was apprehended after approaching a young boy and found guilty of attempted indecent liberties. For this, he served 19 days in jail and was ordered again to get counseling. But Wesley was relentless. No amount of counseling would keep him from pursuing children. In May 1984, police arrested Dodd for molesting a 10-year-old boy. Although his initial sentence would have kept him off the streets, the judge, for reasons unknown, allowed Dodd to stay out of jail by giving him a suspended 1-year sentence, provided that he attend counseling and conduct himself as a good citizen for the balance for the remainder of the sentence. During this period, he was arrested twice for driving with a suspended license, but he was not brought back to jail. Dodd was free to seek out more targets, as he called kids. He would not let probation or warrants stop him. Every decision he made involved his access to children. He chose an apartment building with lots of kids and took jobs at fast food restaurants, convenience stores, and charity truck routes where he would pick up donations from houses. A sexual predator or child molester is always alert and ready for any situation or possibility that may arise. He said, "I started staying alert and watching for opportunities like that to occur again." While on his truck route, he was invited into houses with children. Changing a baby's diapers was enough to arouse Dodd to molestation. If he saw a kid he liked, he wrote down the address with plans to return in his own car, hoping to catch the child alone. On his routes, he would make note of any isolated areas he encountered and marked them on a map. Dodd volunteered to babysit. He took coworkers' sons on a fishing trip as a birthday present, where he sexually abused them. He repeatedly molested a neighbor's 2- and 4-year-old kids, but the mother didn't want to traumatize the boys by pressing charges. And see, that's the thing. Child molesters aren't the ones that are crazy looking or anything like that. They are your Boy Scout leaders, your youth pastors, and I don't even like watching my own kids, let alone volunteering to watch someone else's kids. So if someone actually volunteers to watch your kids, I would definitely question it. This, I know, does not apply to everyone, but it's definitely a cause for concern. In 1986, at the age of 25, Wesley moved to Seattle. He felt invincible, having sexually assaulted at least 30 kids at this point. Now, when I got to Seattle, I had learned I was less likely to be reported for molestation than for an attempt. I decided that from now on, I would be a little more forceful. I would no longer accept no as an answer to my requests, he later wrote. He chose the most vulnerable children, including a roommate's 2-year-old son who was partially deaf and could not yet talk. The boy resisted, and Dodd tied his hands with a bathrobe strap. The idea of force was exciting, he said. Despite the ongoing counseling sessions, Wesley had no intention of controlling his pedophilic urges. In fact, Wesley began to fantasize about killing his victims. The more I thought about it, the more exciting the idea of murder sounded. I planned many ways to kill a boy. Then I started thinking of torture, castration, and even cannibalism. Although he claimed that he decided to murder to keep from going to jail, this is difficult to believe when we consider that he was hardly prosecuted for any of his crimes. Wesley would later rant about how easy it was to manipulate the justice system and stay out of jail. The reason Wesley wanted to kill children was because he was a sexual sadist, stimulated by his control over their sufferings and death. In 1987, Wesley chose the first child he would murder. It would be an 8-year-old boy he met while working as a security guard for a construction site. On his day off, he drove to where the boy lived, hoping to lure him into one of the vacant buildings nearby. Then he planned to take the child into an isolated wooded area where he would kill him. But the kid sensed that his new friend was dangerous. After Dodd asked him to help find a lost little boy, the 8-year-old said that he was going home to get some toys for the lost little boy and promised that he would be right back. Instead, he stayed inside and his mother called the police. Dodd received another light sentence. One district attorney said that they prosecuted the case to the full extent that they were able. Essentially, he tried to get the boy to go with him, but he refused. Nothing more serious happened that we could use. Prosecutors tried to invoke Dodd's history as a sexual predator to convict him for a longer sentence of 5 to 6 years in jail, but the judge reduced the charge to a gross misdemeanor, and Dodd spent only 118 days in jail with 1 year of probation, which was a light sentence, especially in consideration of Dodd's intentions for the boy. By his own admissions, he said that he was predatory and uncontrollable. Psychologist Kenneth Von Cleve saw that Westley Allan Dodd was a serious danger. Mr. Dodd's history of deviant assaults on minors is the most extensive I have ever encountered in an offender of this age, he wrote, and concluded that Dodd was an extremely high risk for future reoffense. Dr. Von Cleve attempted to get Dodd's conviction upgraded to a felony, which would have meant more aggressive treatment. Yet he didn't believe Dodd was capable of violence. He was like a child, said Dr. Von Cleve. When he talked about the offenses, he did it in baby talk like a kid. He fit right in with them, he said. He didn't want to hurt them. Psychopaths are good at tricking counselors. Edmund Kemper was able to trick his counselors when he killed his grandparents at the age of 15 and tricked them into thinking that he was rehabilitated. So this is not uncommon. The following year, just months before the murders began, Dodd briefly got together with an old girlfriend who had brought with her a baby she claimed was his. But after only 5 days together in a motel, she left. He would then move to Vancouver. So who knows what happened in those 5 days. In September 1989, at Pack Paper, where Dodd worked as a shipping clerk, coworkers thought there was something odd about Dodd, who told coworkers that he was employed by the Clark County Sheriff's Office to stand on the corner and watch children. He also claimed that he was divorced and was upset because his infant child had just died of crib death. Other than his weird remarks, no one suspected the clean-shaven, well-heeled Dodd of anything deadly. He was bright, meticulous, and could have easily advanced his position at the company. But Dodd didn't care. His secret vocation, preying on children, was about to escalate to violence. Wesley found a popular place for kids, the David Douglas Park in Vancouver, and decided this would be his new hunting grounds. In the fall of 1989, Dodd, who had just moved to Vancouver, was very desperate to find children. On Labor Day, I was tired from moving and didn't have a TV or anything, so I started thinking about molesting like I'd done in the past, he later said. He found David Douglas Park, located about a mile from his new apartment, and as he walked down the dirt paths on the wooded park, he looked for isolated areas behind the shrubs where kids might wander. In his diary, he wrote that David Douglas Park would be a good place for rape and murder, or kidnap, rape, and murder, just a good hunting ground. On Saturday, September 2nd, Labor Day weekend, Dodd positioned himself near a trail entrance at the park, waiting to exact an extreme toll from his victim. He saw 3 boys but didn't make a move. The incident, however, sparked his violent fantasies. On Sunday morning, Dodd wrote in his diary his plans for the day. Like most sociopaths, he depersonalized his targeted victims. If I can get it home, I'll have more time for various types of rapes rather than just one quickie before murder. In the afternoon, he returned home for lunch, discouraged that he hadn't found a child. Tomorrow, he would pack a lunch so that he could not miss any opportunities. He considered attacking a group of children, fantasizing how he could attack them. With groups of 3, he could kill the oldest quickly and then take his time with the younger victim. By Monday, he was desperate. He would have to be prepared to overtake 2 or more at once. He gathered his hunting gear, which included a fish fillet knife bandaged to his ankle and shoestrings to tie up his victims. As in the previous 2 days, something always seemed to thwart him. A parent following in the wake of his child, a kid's sudden spontaneous turn down another path away from Dodd, or just potential witnesses. Dodd grew increasingly frustrated as his sick fantasies inflamed with the passing of each child who was under someone's watch. He became agitated, willing to take bigger risks. He went home and wrote in his diary. At 6:15 in the evening, he returned to the park and paced restlessly up the path. In the early evening, William Neer, aged 10, and his brother Cole, aged 11, raced their bikes through David Douglas Park on their way home. They were already late for dinner, so they took the shortcut through the park. Billy and Cole had spent the warm afternoon on the golf course, scooping up and returning lost balls for reward money. As they rode down the dirt path, they were stopped by a young man blocking the way, but no one else was around. Dodd told Billy and Cole to get off their bikes. "I want you to come with me." When Billy asked why, Dodd responded, "Because I told you to." Somehow, Dodd exerted control over the 2 boys, and they did what he said. 2 teenagers passed Dodd with the boys, and Dodd told the brothers to be quiet. He led them off the trail and told them to lay down their bikes where they were no longer visible from the path. They continued through a bramble to an isolated spot. Dodd ordered Billy and Cole to stand with their backs to each other, and he tied their wrists together with shoelaces. "Why?" asked Cole over and over. Dodd said that one of them was going to have to pull down his pants. The boys were terrified and confused. Cole asked, "Will it hurt?" Dodd said no. Cole agreed to do it, perhaps out of fear and the desire to protect his younger brother. So far, this strange man didn't say that he was going to hurt them. Perhaps it would be over soon and they could go home. "Why are you doing this to us?" asked Cole. The boys grew increasingly panicked as Dodd began molesting them, but he promised to let them go. Billy began to cry when Dodd turned his attentions to him. Dodd wanted to molest the younger Billy, but he was crying too hard. Dodd then forced the boys onto their knees, took out his knife, and cut apart the shoestrings that connected the brothers. Billy asked if he could go home and tell their father that they would be late. Dodd said no, that he was almost done. He ordered Billy to sit while he molested Cole. "There's just one more thing," said Dodd, with his knife in his hand. The boys sobbed and pleaded, but their cries meant nothing to the predator. Dodd stabbed Billy in the stomach and then attacked Cole as he jumped up, catching him in the side with his knife. But Billy was able to run off toward a busy street. Panicked, Dodd looked down to see Cole on the ground struggling. As Cole tried to defend himself, Dodd stabbed him 2 more times until he stopped moving. He then ran after Billy. Wesley caught Billy before he made it to the road and wrapped his hand around the little boy's arm, furious. I'm sorry," sobbed Billy. The killer stabbed the 10-year-old in the side and shoulder and ran back into the woods. He left both Cole and Billy bleeding to death among the shrubs. Dodd returned to make sure Cole was dead and to retrieve any potential evidence. He already had pocketed the shoelaces and then calmly walked away, hiding his bloody hand in his pocket. Billy, barely alive, was quickly discovered. At first, authorities thought it was a hit-and-run accident, but the boy didn't live to tell them what happened. It would soon be evident that the boy had been viciously attacked. The homicide investigators arrived at the hospital where Billy, who was not yet identified and just called Junior Doe, later died. In the meantime, Billy and Cole's father, Claire Neer, was worried. He searched the neighborhoods and then called the police to report that his 2 sons had not come home. It then occurred to the investigators that they had better search the park for another victim. The brother of Junior Doe, now identified as Billy Neer. By now, night had fallen. They explored the dusty paths and shrubs with their flashlights. It wasn't until 2 a.m. that they found Cole Neer, where Dodd had left him. The parents of Vancouver were horrified. They banded together, organizing sentries, watching over parks and paths that kids used for school. Children were instructed to avoid isolated areas. Although a few witnesses came forward describing the suspicious man lurking in David Douglas Park the day that the Neer brothers were killed, the police had few leads. Sketches of possible suspects circulated the community, but to no avail. The pointless murders were frightening because of the randomness. Wesley had been frustrated by the attack. He didn't get to do the things he fantasized doing with his victims. He went to work but kept to himself, afraid that someone might make a connection between the police artist's rendering of the suspect and him. At home, alone in his room, he clipped articles and wrote his sadistic fantasies in his diary. He was excited by thoughts of how Cole Neer looked as he lay dying, covered with blood. "Right up until the moment I did it, I wasn't absolutely sure I could do it or not," Dodd later said, on killing Cole and Billy. That might have been part of what made the first incident so exciting. He decided that he got more of a high out of killing than molesting. Dodd listed ways to kill children, including fast ways such as stabbing, and slower, more painful deaths, including starvation and bleeding to death. The 20 minutes he had with the Neer boys was not enough. The next victim he wanted to keep indefinitely. Rape and murder now bored him. Dodd now fantasized about the experimental surgeries he wanted to perform on his victims. In one of his many letters written after capture, Dodd questioned his cannibal fantasies at the time. Why? I don't know. I wanted to eat the genitals. Dead children would be a cheap way to feed my slaves if I ever had any. He planned to cut a boy's genitals off and let him slowly bleed to death, or keep him alive and make him watch as he cooked the boy's genitals to eat, forcing him to eat some of it. He would serve a mystery vegetable, the testicles from other boys, and after revealing what the vegetable was, he would tell the kid that they were next. And hey, you eat beef liver, and how about boy's liver? I was mainly interested in eating the genitals while kids watched. I was going to do this as a form of torture more than anything else. Dodd's plans were now beyond psychopathic. Many sexual murderers thrive on fantasies to satisfy their sadistic impulses. But the more they fantasize, the more they lose touch with reality, and the more they distance themselves from others who might be able to help pull them back. As sexual sociopaths continue to nurture these fantasies of killing and torturing people who are little more than objects to them, they diminish any innate sympathy for other human beings. Their victims become puppets of their cruel imaginations, and in order to enact their fantasies, they must dehumanize their victims, and torturing is the ultimate dehumanization. For some reason, the children's very helplessness and innocence is something Dodd wanted to destroy. Toward the end of October, Wesley plotted his next attack. He was frightened that he would be arrested for the murders of Billy and Cole Neer at David Douglas Park. But when he realized that the police didn't have any solid clues, he began to think about killing again. He decided that Saturday afternoons after work was the best to find a boy, but now he just needed to determine where. He drove to Portland, Oregon, just over the bridge from Vancouver, and stopped at Oak Park, a crowded, popular place filled with kids. He approached a little boy who was waiting for a ride called the Spider and asked if he wanted to see something interesting. But the child's father showed up and Wesley scurried away. He left Oaks Park and drove through southeast Portland searching for playgrounds. He passed by Richmond School and decided to try back later. It was getting too dark and kids were not around. Some kids he had spotted quickly disappeared. Dodd went to the movies with the intent of abducting a child in the restroom. He chose The Bear, a family movie, and sat in the back row, but missed his opportunities. With his frustration growing out of control, Dodd was determined to kidnap a child the next day. On Sunday, October 29th, Justin and his little brother Lee told their father that they were going to the school ground park along with another friend. It was a sunny day and their father, Robert Wesley, thought it would be okay. The boys had been there a couple of times before. He told his sons to stay together and to watch out for strangers. The neighborhood was safe, but he warned his children to be careful. That same morning, Wesley drove to the Richmond School playground and waited. Some older kids were playing football while another watched. Then Dodd spotted 4-year-old Lee by himself, playing atop a concrete structure with a slide that the kids called the volcano. After a bit, the little boy slid down to the base. Dodd approached him and smiled. "Hi, how are you doing?" Lee smiled back and said hi. "Would you like to have fun and make some money?" he asked Lee. The boy seemed frightened and hesitated, looking around, and then shook his head no, but Dodd insisted and offered his hand. Lee, perhaps in an automatic response, took his hand. Dodd led the blonde, blue-eyed child to his car, and Lee started to resist. "I don't want any money," Lee said. Sensing his fear, Wesley tried to assure Lee that it would be okay, that his dad sent him to get the boy, he said. But when Wesley placed Lee in his car and drove off, the boy said, "I live the other way." "We're going to my house to play some games," said Dodd. "Just do what I tell you, and I promise I won't hurt you, but you'll have to be quiet when we get there. My landlady doesn't like little kids." But Lee was worried that his brother was going to miss him, but Dodd smoothed him, saying that they would have fun, and his brother was having fun too. Unfortunately, Dodd had years of experience knowing what to say to kids to gain their trust, and what to say to keep them calm and quiet. At the same time that Wesley was arriving at his apartment in Vancouver, a distraught Robert Wesley was calling the police to report that his son was missing. His older boy had returned home, frantic that he couldn't find Lee anywhere. One minute Lee was playing on the volcano, and the next he disappeared. Robert told the police that Lee's kind of a kid who doesn't take off, but he can get sidetracked easily. Wesley Dodd's landlord wasn't at home, and it seemed that no one saw him arrive with Lee. Inside, Dodd took some pictures of Lee with his Polaroid camera, then told Lee to get undressed and tied him to the bed with ropes. He took more pictures, untied the boy, and then molested him. Afterwards, Lee watched cartoons on the television while Dodd recorded the events in his diary. He asked Lee if he wanted to spend the night with him. "No," the boy said. "My brother might miss me." But Dodd answered, "Nah, your brother's probably having fun too." He then took Lee to Kmart to buy him a toy where the boy began to cry. A store employee approached them, concerned, but Dodd explained that it was okay. He was babysitting his nephew who wanted to go home. Afterwards, they went to McDonald's in Vancouver, only blocks away from where Dodd killed Cole and Billy Neer. Once back at the apartment, Dodd wrote as Lee played with his new toy. He suspects nothing now. We'll probably wait until morning to kill him. That way his body will be fairly fresh for experiments after work. I'll suffocate him in his sleep when I wake up for work, if I sleep. Dodd continued to molest the little boy through the night, taking breaks to record more notes in his diary. He fantasized about how he would kill the child and how he would hide him while he was at work. At one point, Dodd woke Lee up. "I'm going to kill you in the morning," he whispered. "No, you're not," cried Lee. Dodd then calmed the 4-year-old down and told him that he wouldn't kill him. Eventually, the child fell back to sleep, but in the early morning, Wesley strangled the sleeping boy, who struggled as hard as he could against the attack. After cruelly reviving the child, Dodd strangled Lee with a rope and hung him in his crowded little closet so he could take pictures, shoving aside hangers and jackets to make room. Those who saw the Polaroids of Lee Ezeli's sufferings and debasement will never forget the depth of Dodd's cruel and cold-blooded depravity. Dodd then hid Lee's little body in the closet behind some blankets and pillows in case his landlady came in. It was time to get to work, and Dodd didn't want to be late. When Dodd returned home from work, he poured more into his obsessive diary. He would now have to get some bags to hide Lee. Then he wrote, "I'll figure out a place to dump the garbage." He drove to a dock near the packed paper plant and discarded Lee in the brush near Vancouver Lake, in plain sight, without the slightest bit of remorse. He burned the child's clothing in a barrel in the backyard, except for Lee's little Ghostbusters underwear, which he stashed away in a briefcase under his bed. It had been a few days since Lee was missing. Robert Wesley hoped that an adult who was lonely and wanted the company of a little boy had abducted Lee. "There are a lot of people out there who are lonely," he said in a public comment. "Maybe someone who never had a child, or who never got to dress up on Halloween, or never got presents at Christmas. If it's something like that, he could just drop him off at a store or a street corner." On the morning of November 1st, 1989, a pheasant hunter discovered Lee at Vancouver Lake. The investigators were shocked and dismayed to see the little boy dumped alongside some garbage, so ruthlessly discarded. One sheriff later said, "What could a 4-year-old do to make someone kill him?" Dr. Ronald Turco prepared a psychological profile of the killer. He'd be 25 to 35 years old and kicked out of the military if he served. He would be a loner and probably kept photos of his victims, a diary of his offenses, including clipped articles and child pornography. The killer probably chose boys because he saw girls as defective. Although this profile accurately described Dodd, it wasn't enough to conjure up a definitive suspect. Composite sketches were released, and hundreds of calls came in from people who thought they had seen Lee with someone, but there were no solid leads. Investigators attended at Lee's funeral hoping to spot the killer, but Dodd stayed away. He sat in his room, alone with a diary, and built a torture rack out of boards and ropes, intended for his next victim. He decided that his best chance to find another child would be at the movies. He checked the listings for family features. After a few attempts, there was success, but this time, Westley Allan Dodd would be the capture. And thanks to a brave 6-year-old boy named James and a courageous William Ray Graves, this monster was finally caught. This brings us back to the beginning of the story, when Dodd was arrested. Dodd was visibly nervous as detectives from both Washington and Oregon interrogated him. His record revealed a litany of crimes against children. The most serious was an attempted abduction in Seattle in 1987. More importantly, they realized that their suspect lived a short distance from where Cole and Billy Neer were killed, and worked close to where Lee Ezeli's body was found. When questioned about the incident at the New Liberty Theater, Dodd tried to convince the detectives that he intended only to molest the boy in the restroom. He admitted to his history of molestations, but left out the murders. Eventually, Dodd confessed that he had killed Billy and Cole Neer and Lee Ezeli, and then he went into graphic detail. He claimed that he had to kill the Neers so that they wouldn't identify him. "When Cole pulled his pants down, I knew I wouldn't be able to let them go," he said. Dodd then recounted how he coaxed Lee into his car and brought him home, where he molested and killed him. Detectives were disgusted by Dodd's admissions, but were even more disturbed by the fact that Dodd seemed to enjoy reliving the events. He then told them about the briefcase under the bed where he hid his diaries, his photo albums, and Lee's underwear. As investigators searched Dodd's apartment, they found ropes and belts, X-Acto knives, and ropes around the single bed's headboard and footboard. They found 4 volumes of parent-child books and a copy of the New Testament with the words "Satan lives" scrawled inside. They also found Dodd's homemade torture rack, which had not yet been used. But the most incriminating discovery was Dodd's briefcase hidden under the bed. The first thing investigators noticed when they unlatched the briefcase was Lee's folded Ghostbusters underwear. They found his diaries, which painstakingly recounted his assaults and plans for future murders. Dodd had neatly organized the articles pertaining to the Near and Wesley cases and had systematically arranged his notes on the crimes, divided into separate envelopes titled Incident 1, Incident 2, and Incident 3. A photo album with the words "Family Memories" on the cover functioned as Dodd's pornographic collection, which included images of Christ as a baby from iconographic paintings. It also contained advertising and images of children in underwear. There were Polaroids of Dodd naked, Dodd assaulting Lee, and pictures taken of Lee after he had died, including one of the little boy hanging in the closet. Dodd was charged with first-degree murder in the deaths of Billy and Cole Neer and Lee Wesley, as well as attempted kidnapping in the New Liberty Theater. Initially, Dodd pleaded not guilty, but in January 1990, against his attorney's wishes, he changed his pleas to guilty on all counts. Later that year, he stood before a Clark County judge and read a statement indicting himself on all charges. He admitted that his crimes, including murder, were premeditated. There would be no trial to determine his guilt, but a jury would have to decide whether or not to give him the death penalty. "Look at what Mr. Dodd likes to do in his free time," said Prosecutor Roger Bennett to the jury. "Plan child murders, commit child murders, relive fantasies about child murders, and write about them. With life without parole, 2 of those things are still available to him." The jury of 6 men and 6 women listened with disbelief, disgust, and grief as they read sections from Dodd's diary and saw the photos implicating Dodd's brutalities against Lee Wesley. One of the jurors nearly passed out as he listened to parts of the diary read aloud. They also heard Dodd's detailed plans for his future victims, which included mutilation, dismemberment, and death. Dodd's defense did not call any witnesses, nor did they present any evidence during the trial. Defense attorney Lee Dane did try to suggest that only an insane person would write the diaries that Dodd kept. During the trial, Dodd sat quietly, stone-faced. He later told the Organian that he was bored by the testimony. "I've heard it so many times now, it's kind of old, really." Prosecutors asked for the death penalty, and on Saturday, July 15, 1990, the jury agreed that Dodd should die for his crimes. William Ray Graves, who apprehended Dodd outside the New Liberty Theater, said that the man doesn't deserve to live, not someone who does that to babies. "There's nothing more precious than them little guys." Dodd was in the odd position of having to defend his decision to die. "I didn't offer any mitigating evidence during the penalty phase because, in my mind, that's just an excuse, and I don't want to make any excuses," he told the court. "I do not blame the criminal justice system for anything, but the system does not work and I can tell them why," he said. "It doesn't really matter why the crimes happened. I should be punished to the full extent of the law, as should all sex offenders and murderers," Dodd stated. That if his death would bring relief to victims' families, then he should die as soon as possible. After the sentence, Dodd insisted that hanging was the appropriate means of execution, and that he did not want his death delayed by appeals. Dodd said that he must be executed before he has an opportunity to escape or kill someone within the prison. "If I do escape, I promise you, I will kill and rape and enjoy every minute of it," he told the court. He wanted to hang, he said, because that's the way Lee Wesley died. The judge set Dodd's execution date for January 5th, 1993 in Walla Walla, Washington. The ACLU fought to keep Dodd off the gallows, arguing that death, especially hanging, was cruel and unusual punishment. But Washington's justice system prevailed, and Dodd's execution date moved closer. By choosing a particularly cruel form of capital punishment, hanging, Dodd fiercely polarized the capital punishment debate, and many rallied to stop the execution. Although Dodd indicated that he wanted to die, it seemed that he wanted to die a martyr, not as a criminal. As his execution date approached, Westley Allan Dodd professed remorse for what he had done. "I have confessed all my sins," he told a reporter in his interview. "I believe what the Bible teaches. I'll go to heaven. I have doubts, but I'd really like to believe that I would be able to get up there to the 3 little boys and give them a hug and tell them how sorry I was and be able to love them with real true love and have no desire to hurt them in any way." At 12:05 a.m. on January 5th, Wesley Dodd was executed by hanging. He was the first inmate to die at the gallows since 1965. However, this story is not yet over. I have the entirety of Dodd's diary, and I will read it to you. This was the diary that was found in the briefcase underneath his bed with the pictures of himself and Leah Zelli, as I previously talked about. I will read this to you on my next episode in its entirety. Until then, keep an eye on your children, and have a good evening.